Back with you tonight, John in Focus, Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405. Thanks for staying on. The South African bus coach bodies says the industry is in a steady decline and that its entire value chain is also affected. To give us more insight on this, we're now joined by the Executive Manager, Southern African Bus Operators Association, Bazil Govender. Bazil, good evening and thank you very much for your time and for joining us on In Focus. From the last conversation that we were having, of course, we were talking around the question of subsidies and the number of busing companies that were in trouble because of the COVID-19 situation. How has the situation been, and has there been any improvement since the opening up of the regulations and more people are being allowed to be on buses?
Evening, Tabo. Evening to your listeners. Sad to say, no. Definitely no improvement. In fact, the situation's worsening. There's just so much at play. And I think of recent we've been dominated by all the attacks on the buses in the Western Cape and further on the long distance sector, and just destruction of property. But what I can add, excuse me, since we last chatted, Tabo, and for your viewers, on the back of Stats SA releasing their labor workforce stats for year on year, they indicated that the transport sector in total had shed 54,000 jobs. Now, another very important player, association and organization in our sector, and the road passenger sector, SAPAC, which deals with the bargaining between labor and employees collectively. They've come out with a study based on their research, and it's frightening and it's distressing to the extent that since 2019 and to their end of year at 2021, which is probably 2 years in the height of COVID, their bargaining sector has been decimated.
Sure.
We're talking some staggering numbers, Tabo. Just in terms of registered companies with the council, started in 2019 with 109, ended up now at 2022 with 74 companies. That's 34 companies that have closed. There's an attempt by one or two to stand back up, but it's going to be a long run. But I think of more concern is the impact on employees in the sector, Tabo.
Yeah.
End of 2019, collectively, the industry had about 22,000, just over 22,000 employees. And at the end of 2021, that number's down to just over 15,000. So there's an impact directly on 7,000 employees just in the passenger sector of road transport for the bus and coach.
And what does this indicate to you, man, in terms of the work that would need to be put in here to stabilize the industry and maybe to save those that are still there but hanging on by a thread to survive?
Tabo, we've been advocating for, prior to COVID just took us right to the precipice, and we, as you said, hanging by the thread now. And might I add, this information's still, in our opinion, very conservative. So the extended impact to households and families is quite bleak. But coming back to your question, we've been calling consistently. There are systemic issues within public transport as a whole. The industry cannot fix this on its own. We've conducted independent surveys as to the resilience and what the industry has done. We've shared it with the National Department. We desperately believe the time has come for a bus sector Indaba with the Minister, with the National Department. It does not help our cause that intermittently we're dealing with different Director Generals within the National Department of Transport. So there's a lack of cohesion in terms of the information flow there. But certainly time, Tabo, for the Minister to come to the table. We've done everything short of demanding a no-go zone from his office, which if you look around, what public sentiment seems to do is, if you're not heard, take radical action to be heard. Now, the bus and coach sector is highly regulated, very compliant, and we are calling on the Minister, as well as the Justice Cluster, the Department of Labour, collectively from government, to look to the bus industry and engage. There are a myriad of problems. It's a basket of systemic issues.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy.
Talk to us about
waiting.
what you call long-standing policy issues. Just maybe highlight what would be priority issues immediately that you would want to address directly with the minister at the busing INDAP.
Immediately to be addressed would be the funding issue for public transport, Thabo. That's a holistic approach to funding. There's various grants. There's the PTOG, there's the PTNG. We need to address the bias focus towards developing a multi-tier transport system with BRTs, with different funding models and poor utilizations. Then there's the taxi element that still needs to come into the integrated transport network. And then there's the actual tendering and procurement process that needs to be put into place for public transport services to be rendered, whether they are direct managed services or direct transport services. All of these are knitted and feed off each other, Thabo, and without addressing fundamentally the policy to implement integrated transport and develop a funding model towards that, we are going to be sitting in limbo.
Are you getting a sense that there's a lack of desire to integrate, maybe from the other sectors like the taxi industry?
Certainly not. I think the will for integration from all stakeholders and all social partners is there. Everybody's crying out on different platforms. We just need to consolidate our efforts. The ministers had a very successful Lakotla with the taxis, came out with very clear indications. The bus sector has been neglected for 25 years. About 25 years. There's been no formal process to deal with the tendering that's currently in place, the contracts that have expired and are just being extended either month to month, year to year, or for at best a 3-year period, which is highly limiting for current operators to plan, to invest, to make long-term decisions. And most of all, if not done so, very recently we ended up in court to avoid the implosion of public transport in Gauteng, which should have seen close on to 200,000 employees directly and indirectly in the sector being affected, and virtually all companies literally closing down if we did not litigate. So to avoid
the taxi industry, I mean, as you raise that issue, always argues that the busing sector is much more better organized. For example, you've got labor representation. That strike that was averted, you're talking about, you had unions, for example, was it NUMSA that we were speaking to quite often, fighting for bus drivers and the likes, something that the taxi industry is saying we don't have. So they are looking at this sector saying you are in a much better organized position than possibly the taxi industry.
We are definitely in a better space, better organized, more regulated, highly compliant. And the only option for mass transit at the moment, given the failures of PRASA. So we can't afford an industry like ours to lose 7,000 employees. And speaking of which, Thabo, the labor environment has been severely hit. So we had all 15 unions operating within this environment have lost membership. Now you're leaving some of the unions on the brink of exiting the sector completely, and so it's eroding the bargaining space as well for employees. And if you think of that kind of numbers that exit the industry, certainly a lot of skill, a lot of talent, a lot of experience. So again, we are calling both SAPAC and SABAWA collectively and individually representing this coach and bus sector for government to come to the table. It has been too long. We've been patient. In fact, the minister committed at the annual conference of the industry to engage us on the outcomes from the conference. We've deposited a letter, a follow-up request. The DG in the department is acting and is also changed from the previous DG from the 7th of April. So we are really at wit's end. And this is another measure to put into the public domain, that the industry is doing everything it can,
right,
but government is just not coming to the table, Thabo.
Basil, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on once again. Bazil Govender, Executive Manager, Southern Africa Bus Operators Association. Once again, reaching out to the Minister and making a call for a busing in Daba, saying the bodies have done all they possibly can, but the sector is being decimated by economic hardship. Add to that the extortion and the crime of those rogue elements that you're seeing, for example, in the Western Cape, saying it's time to sit around the table and have a conversation.